Ain't no telephone bills.
All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming with our current events and our interviews after we've had a handful of ConcreteWorks interviews, and we will touch on that. We had a big time out at ConcreteWorks. I really enjoyed it. We went, one other time, like 10 years ago or something. And I don't think we knew near as many people, back in 2014 as we do now. And we also didn't have the podcast. So this go round was it was a lot more fun. It was good to roll in there and know a lot of people at that thing. What do you think?
Yeah, it was exciting. And I've said it before, and we'll say it again. I'm not really a vibes guy, but the vibes at that show, high
Yeah.
vibes, good time. Great to see everyone that we've come to know throughout the years. Look forward to going back next year.
Yeah. It's always good to see people in person. I mean, we see people, through the screen and, with the video and everything else, but I don't know. It's just good to meet face to face finally. And we've said it before, like even just in person interviews and in person, episodes that we've done, they're so much better. The interaction is so much better. You can only do so much through the age of video, conference calls and interviews and such. So it's good to shake hands with people.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss everybody next week. So we're recording this the week prior, but this is gonna drop on Election Day next week, November 5th. And at that same time, here in Philadelphia, where I'm at, we're gonna be having the ACI convention, which I was looking forward to seeing everybody come to where I live. Be really great to catch up with folks that we haven't seen throughout the year. Unfortunately, fortunately,
fortunately for business, unfortunately for the podcast.
Yeah, well, or for networking or
for network, yeah.
Seeing folks that I really like seeing. Joey and I are going to be out in New Mexico putting Actigel in a copper concentrate pipeline. So if that's new to you, it's been new to us through the last few years. Really excited to see the Actigel doing what it does to help concrete pump. It can help other mineral slurries pump. So it's fun to see that. We're excited to go out there, help these guys. Maybe we can improve the efficiency of their pipeline.
Yeah, we'll have what we are able to talk about. When we return from there, we should really talk about it on the podcast because it's just not something that or is at all discussed around here. We stick to concrete. We are a concrete podcast, but the mineral slurry and the mining aspect of our customer base is still super interesting. It's very new to me. I only know just what stuff you've told me basically, and what little bit of stuff that we've done up in Canada. But yeah, we should do a deep dive into what Actigel does and what goes on at these places. I think that'd be cool.
All right, that is a cool idea. I hope the audience would like to hear what it is that we do. I think I've heard some of the travel stories.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stories going to Australia and the North Pole and all over Africa and stuff. This one, thank God, is in America. It's the first one I've gotten to do. The other one that we had that was in America, like the bosses got to go to that one. They're like, "Oh, don't worry,
of course, yeah."
Yeah, we'll go to Idaho up into Yellowstone. We'll take care of this one.
We got this one, boys. Y'all go to the places that are lucky to have running water.
Yeah. Didn't have, yeah, very lucky. The only reason they had it was because like the gold mine was there. And like once you leave the compound, there was no more running water.
Yeah. No, those places are their own. They're literally their own cities. It's pretty crazy when you get on there and you see what all they have for their for the employees and for the people visiting and everything else. It's awesome.
Yeah, this one's the one we're about to go to next week is or when the week when this is coming out, we're probably going to be on an airplane while it's being uploaded to the internet. But that one, it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's 3 hours from a major internet, or 4 hours from like a major airport. But man, I'll take that over flying halfway across the world for sure.
Absolutely. We can't go on without talking a little bit of college football, and it's been a little while. If you
we can skip this section. Nobody lost.
I'll keep the censor button handy for this discussion. No, but if you were with us with the ConcreteWorks interviews, you you heard us talk about the the atmosphere of watching college football with all of our friends out there in Denver, which was awesome. And some pretty big things have happened since then, and I hope nothing too drastic else happens by the time that this episode drops. So we'll see what all happens this upcoming weekend. But the elephant in the room, I guess, so to speak, no pun intended.
There was literally a pun intended. Why would you lie to this audience and say there was no pun intended? Yeah, okay, fine. Tennessee beat Alabama. It's twice in 3 years, but only like the third time in like 20 years. So
Yeah,
congratulations on your win.
Yeah, if you would call that, I will behave and say that it was a very sloppy game. We just, I don't know. I think I said this exact same thing after the Florida game. Like we messed up just less enough than you guys, to win that game. It was very, very sloppy. I think Nico kind of woke up. I think after he got the living crap knocked out of him, what in that first half, like he had to sit out for at least a possession or two, I think. And then after that, it was like something like some light bulb went off in his head, and he was actually making throws that we all thought he could make. Before he looked like Joe Milton out there, just Uncle Rico and a ball down the field with no hopes of anybody ever catching it.
Well, he can throw it over a mountain, that's for sure. I'm getting nervous about old Alabama. So we've lost twice this year. The only two teams we've lost to are the two teams that like they had their starting quarterback. So that we won the first game of the year against Western Kentucky, but they were breaking in a brand new quarterback who was a transfer, TJ Finley, who's been terrible everywhere he's ever played.
Mhm.
He was at LSU, he was at Auburn, now he's at Western Kentucky. He's been terrible at all of them. And they were like, oh, let's give this guy a try. And then they had to substitute him out halfway through the game because he was awful, couldn't complete a pass. So, and then I think the other guy went down. They had to go back to Finley. It was awful. They were just awful. So no good for them. Beat Wisconsin. Their starting quarterback injured in the first quarter. We beat South Florida, but barely. We shouldn't have won. We really shouldn't have. They overthrew 18 wide open wide receivers. It's unbelievable. Should have lost that game. Lose to Vanderbilt. They have their starting quarterback. Lose to Tennessee. They have their starting quarterback. And we won against Missouri, and their quarterback got injured in the first quarter. Well, he actually got injured in the previous game, but he tried to play in this game, got knocked out in the first quarter. So the only games we're winning are teams that don't have their starting quarterback anymore.
Well, I mean, in your defense, you did beat Georgia, and I think Carson started that whole game. They just like came alive in the second half, and they mounted
this is
comeback.
This is how traumatized I am. I forgot we won that game.
Who then just put a absolute stomping on Texas. I think was Texas ranked number 1 when they played?
Yes, sir.
So down goes the number 1 team of the country once again this year. So
that's a good team, though. That Texas team's a good team. Georgia's a good team. You just can't block Georgia's D-line. Well, all right, there you go. When we played Georgia, they didn't have like half their starters on D-line because they were all hurt. All those kids came back. They stomped a mud hole in Texas. Look, you said things might be different. The conversation might be different when this drops because we're a week behind with the way the scheduling works. Alabama's on a bye this weekend. So I'm going to feel the exact same way. Stressed. Kalen DeBoer needs to stop wearing T-shirts, put on better clothes. And Jalen Milroe needs to figure out how to like hit his wide receivers in the hands. The footwork and accuracy, just a mess. The Jalen Milroe in the first half of the Georgia game, like where did that guy go?
Right.
We won 34-0 this weekend. Normally you'd be really thrilled about it. If you actually watched the game, it was awful. It was awful. It was absolutely. The only reason we won, we intercepted their backup quarterback was so bad, dude. Missouri's backup quarterback was so bad. We intercepted him on like 3 of his first 4 passes. So the only reason we won the game.
Golly. Well, we play Kentucky, and my battered Vol syndrome still does not feel confident about going into any game at all, especially this year, man. I mean, this year, like it's been proven that you can't count out anybody because Vandy is, doing Vandy things or doing really good things this year. I think Mississippi State is kind of like the bottom of the barrel, but I think they have they've had a couple sparks of life in whatever, a couple of their games. Texas A&M remains the only undefeated team in the conference. Nobody saw that preseason 24. Nobody saw that, especially after their first. They played Notre Dame. They lost Notre Dame, and man, ever since then they just been getting on it. And so,
fun time to be a college football fan. It was a fun time being at ConcreteWorks to watch it with a lot of our friends. Hey,
yeah.
I want to switch gears into something that is also exciting to me, and I like new technologies in the concrete space. I know you do too. Our audience does, and this new technology is around like aggregates, and the aggregate stuff. It interests us because we've got the Actigel, which helps use a lot more man sand and stuff. So finishing and pumping of concrete so much better. And so I was excited to read this because this technology about like they're calling it a recycled aggregate or a repurposed aggregate. And so my first thought, anytime I hear recycled aggregate, my first thought is crushed concrete. It's super porous. It's really hard to use. And so these guys were claiming they had like a fix for it. This Canadian company. And I was like, all right, this is cool. Let's go see what they're doing. And it was a little bit different. They're basically taking like soils from a construction site. Maybe you've done some demo and you've done, some site work, and there's aggregates that are in the soil that's being moved. Well, not every landfill will take that. They want like clean dirt. And so sometimes you could be a long way away from one of these specialized facilities, or they're charging you extra. And the cost to haul this stuff back and forth is just tremendous. So they're setting up these aggregate plants that are, sifting, washing, crushing, screening, cycloning. Out comes these, nice, beautiful looking aggregates. And I showed you some of them earlier before we started recording, and they're number 8 stone, they're number 57 stone. Like, they look pretty good. The problem with the larger rocks though is it was a mix of natural river rock and like cubical gravel, crushed gravel. Man, that's going to be an absolute nightmare to formulate a mix design with. And then I was like, all right, let me check out what their repurposed sand. And they were calling this a C33 sand. I was like, sweet. Let me get a look at it. Oh my God. It is quite possibly some of the worst sand I've ever laid eyes on in my life. I could not imagine having to try to make concrete with that. Well, Actigel is borderline a miracle worker. I don't know that it could fix this sand. And so now I'm sad. I was so happy to like look at this technology, and I want the aggregate industry to move forward and figure out a way to use recycle or low quality, what we would call low quality. Can't be low strength.
Right.
That's one quality you can't really have. You can't. It's really, really difficult to use a low strength aggregate unless you're doing fill work, or you're making a low strength concrete block that doesn't really need a ton. And so, I want the industry to go forward and do amazing things, but this one just wasn't it. And I'm putting putting hope out there into the universe right now that people are going to find a way to use recycle aggregates, use recycled concrete, take this low value stuff and make it usable. And some of this, like I said, some of these, like this number 8 stone looks really nice, but I bet you it's like $50 a ton. And
there's
that
no
makes
telling.
Well, did you see the plant that they were? So you got to haul it back, because you got to haul it back. That sucks. And then you putting all this work into it, and then you got to haul it again.
Yeah,
I don't know how you sell it, and make any profit unless it's $50-$60 a ton. I just, whew, I mean, just I'm sweating just saying that. $50 a ton, number 8 stone. Just whoo, it's hot in here. Is it just me? So,
right.
anyway,
Right.
I hope these people get it figured out, man.
Yeah, I mean, you showed me a picture of that C33 sand, and my first reaction was, it looks like playground sand. It looks like the stuff in my kid's sandbox out in the backyard. There's there's all shapes and sizes of stones in there. Might have been a seashell in there. No telling what else. And if you put like a gray filter over this picture, it would look like some of the worst man sand that we've encountered. I would love to see the sieve analysis on this sand and just see, what all's in there, what all comes up. They had another sand, the fine sand. I don't know if they would classify that as like masonry sand or whatever, but it looked clean. It looked good. I mean, clean in the fact that it didn't have a bunch of junk in it. There were no stones in it, anything like that. It looked pretty good.
Yeah, they're
Um,
getting. It looks like they're getting those ultra fine clays. They're getting all that out of there. Yeah, the really fine sand. It looks like a masonry sand for sure, and
mm-hmm.
it looks clean. The rocks look clean. Man, the mix of rock types just scares the crap out of me, especially when you get up to like the 57 stones.
Yeah. Give them a little credit for trying, I guess.
Yeah, well, and even if you were going to use it for like fill work and stuff, like that's cool, but this stuff's going to be expensive.
Right. Yeah, I'd be really curious to see how much that stuff cost landed after you get done hauling it around everywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started, for those that aren't aware, I know I've mentioned a million times. I'm so sorry, but I'm almost done with my MBA at business school at Villanova University, and so doing all these different cases and stuff. And one of the things I noticed, we've had a couple classes where we had to do assignments for nonprofits and NGOs, and so these nonprofit companies, like the way they get their money is almost always through grant work,
Mm-hmm.
and they all speak like a similar way. And what I noticed is like the reason they do that is because they have very limited resources. They're jumping from grant to grant, and once that grant's up, like you better find you another grant.
Yep.
And whew, that's a scary way to live. And these guys
Mm-hmm.
are jumping from grant to grant. They have one product usually. It does like one thing in a limited area, and they're constantly trying to do more with less.
Yep.
And the people that do that, like what I come to notice when you're doing all this research and doing all this stuff for these nonprofits, it's like they speak the same language. Their websites look the same. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like just this way that they do things. And these stone guys, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. I was like, oh, okay. Like they got grants from the government. Turns
Mm-hmm.
out I was looking at a couple of them. It's exactly. I went a little bit deeper on them, and I was like, yep, they got grants from the government. They make one thing. They're trying, man. They're bootstrapping,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't really have a business yet. So I do hope they figure it out.
Now, the experience that I have with the conservation organizations that I've been a part of over the years, some of the bigger ones, they have someone full time, like a full time job. That's all they do is write proposals for grants and stuff like that. And it's not just grants from the government or the federal government or state government. There are companies that give out grants too. Like I remember one was from Patagonia for, I forget what it was, but Patagonia was giving out some big, huge grant, which to Patagonia was a tax write off. Well,
I
I
think
mean, it was, but I mean, you could get, I don't know, it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes for these giant grants.
Patagonia might be a B Corp. B Corp
Okay.
is it's like this really high end designation for companies that do like social work.
Mm,
So they might be a for profit business, which
right.
Patagonia absolutely is, but they dedicate like a ton of their resources to either helping the environment or
Yeah.
helping other businesses or helping social causes, and it's like
Yeah.
the root of the company. I think they
Right.
might be. I could be wrong, but I think they might be one of those. So it doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me at all that they're handing out super large grants and probably a bunch of them
Yeah. Yeah.
to other environmental causes.
Right. Right. So, yeah. Um, Grants are a big deal in that because that's where the majority of your funding is going to come from. I mean, the conservation organizations had memberships and everything else, donations or whatever, but they could not match the amount of money that they were getting from grants. You just couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we're working with one right now. I don't know how much I can even say about it, but what I thought was interesting was the CEO said that's what he's best at is
Yeah.
writing grants and meeting with donors.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. I would thought like the technology he created would be like his best thing. He's like, nope, I hire people to do that. He's like, my best thing's writing grants, getting
Yep.
that money.
Yep. Yep. That's pretty cool. So I wanted to cover a couple things that I actually heard and we were talking about at the the CIM National Steering Committee a few weeks ago, and one of the main things that I got from it was the last day, and the way they had it set up is the National Steering Committee. They have different kinds of subcommittees. They have education, marketing, recruitment, board of directors. You name it, like every other organization. Um, and Dr. Brown, who we all know and love, is the head of the education committee, and rightfully so. Being she was the dean of the concrete department for years. She brought up something that I thought was really interesting, and it had kind of been in the back of my mind for years, but I mean, I never really thought that much into it. But she was talking about the need for CIM graduates in plant manager and operations positions, and the majority of, or a lot of the CIM graduates, and I remember from back in the day, what are you going to do when you get out of school? Project manager, project manager. Like, so many people wanted to be a project manager. Well, what does a project manager do? I mean, just depends on where you land. A project manager could sweep the floor, or a project manager could actually manage a multi-million-dollar project. And I don't know, I think project manager was just an umbrella term for some kind of mid-level management position that somebody wanted out of college. But she was saying, hey, where the area that these graduates can really make an effect is at the plant level. When you have someone with a little bit of background, some proper leadership training, management training in that position, like, it could do wonders for that company. And we give batch guys a lot of grief, because you walk into a batch house, just about any concrete plant. It's another war room, just like the dispatch room or anything else. And sometimes they're all in the same room. And so the batch guy's going to get a lot of flack. He is responsible for a lot of stuff that happens around that plant. And so she was saying, just, hey, this would be perfect for our graduates. And how do we get the industry to, get more of our graduates in these positions? And there was a couple of really good ideas, kind of thrown around, one being that we need to introduce more of our operations classes in the CIM program in that, first and second year, instead of maybe that third or fourth year, after somebody's already made their mind up. They don't want to go into operations. They want to go into sales. Everybody wants to go into sales. Everybody wants to go into project management and all these other, these flashier or these other titles. And we need to have that stuff earlier on in the curriculum. And one thought I had was, we need more internships with training in these plant positions. And I don't know how anybody else's internship was, but I remember mine was just basic. I was at, Joe Blow Ready Mix, or V&W Ready Mix, out in Hohenwald. And it was during the recession, so things were pretty slow, but they had me doing a little bit of everything. And I think if you go to some of these larger companies, I think they could have a really good training program for these graduates, for these interns, to where they could take the reins of the plant manager position out of college. So I thought that was one thing. And another thing was the type of people that you're going to be recruiting that you want in these positions. And my thought was, you need to be recruiting the same people that the ag department is trying to recruit. People that they're willing to work. They come from some of these more rural communities. Maybe their first thought isn't sales, isn't project management. Maybe it's something different, because they don't want to fly a desk for a living. Maybe they don't want to stay clean every day. They're willing to be out around the plant, doing stuff around the plant. So that was a couple things, from the education side of things. And then Jennifer Mannett, who from South Dakota State, and we're actually going to interview her here pretty soon. She had a really good point about listing CIM degrees as a preferred degree on job postings. You see all these job postings, and you see, down in the requirements, or or anything like that. It's a preferred bachelor's degree, a preferred degree in construction management, preferred degree in business, you name it. We need to have more people in the industry, more companies in the industry list CIM as a preferred degree. And her reasoning was, when she's trying to recruit kids to come to the program, she's talking to the parents. The parents many times have come to her with, an example of a job listing or a job description. And that job description would have that, construction management, whatever degree that's preferred. CIM wouldn't be on there. And so they were like, why should my kid go to the CIM program when it's not preferred anywhere? It's not listed on any job listing that I've come across. So why should my kid go there? And I mean, what do you say to that? So that was a really good point. I think it would do, I agree with her that it would do wonders for recruitment if we started doing that, especially with, the amount of alumni that we have in all these different huge companies. Like, why couldn't you have a CIM degree preferred, line in that requirement down at the bottom there? Or just have something. Another thing I thought about too was with all these other companies, like, why couldn't you have like maybe something on their website, like a banner of some kind, like, hey, we hire CIM graduates, or something that lets the world know that they have CIM graduates working for them, and maybe that would entice folks more to get that degree. So those were a couple of the big things that were taken away from the National Steering Committee. And the last thing I thought was super cool was Chico, the CIM program out at Chico in California. They're actually working with a concrete supplier in Hawaii that pays half the tuition of employees, kids, nieces, nephews, if they go through the CIM program at Chico. So if you're an employee, if you got a kid or a niece or a nephew that wants to go to the CIM program and you work for that company, they will pay half their tuition if they go through CIM program. I thought that was super, super cool.
Yeah, that's great. So if you're living in Hawaii and you think you got somebody that wants to go into the concrete world, or you can convince them to get some money off, go get a good degree. Chico State, they unfortunately were in the news this past summer. That poor kid got into a terrible boating accident. Or was a lake accident on a jet ski. It doesn't sound like it was his fault. It sounds like he was a good kid, and passed away, unfortunately. And Dominic they're going to be celebrating him when they commission the project that he worked on over the summer. It's coming up in Connecticut first weekend of November, actually this weekend. Unfortunately, this podcast is going to come out the weekend after the celebration, but just want to know that he's in our thoughts and prayers, and we hope that those folks have a great celebration of life out there when they dedicate that skate park he worked on. They're going to have a little memorial out there for him, so it's going to be a nice moment. A couple of things you hit on there. You mentioned that it'd be great if we had preferred CIM as a degree on some of these job listings. That is a cool idea. I hope that we've earned that as a group. It's been 25 years of graduates. I'd like to think that we've earned that. It's just a lack of oversight from some of the HR divisions in these companies, and then we can get that moved out there. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So I think another question would be like, why hasn't that happened yet? I think part of that is the industry buy-in that we have didn't necessarily take into account in resumes on Indeed. So part of what I'm saying is that it's not just the construction firms; it's the concrete firms. They just know inherently, and they recruit from purposefully. How many times when we were in school, well, a couple of years before the Great Recession hit, and then since it recovered afterwards, these kids that are going to major at these schools, they're being approached on campus twice a week with companies begging them to come intern and come work for them. And I think so. That would be my counter response. By the way, if I was sitting in the living room of a parent who's like, "Well, it doesn't say preferred here," it's like, listen, there is no other degree that has folks coming to campus and begging you to work for them.
Right.
I go to Villanova's campus to the business school and see what they do with their undergrads, which is kind of interesting because I don't remember seeing that in business school at Middle Tennessee State, but I see it here where like all the big firms, like the big four accounting firms, all these other like massive companies, they come in and they're constantly on campus trying to get their name in front of these undergrads because they want the undergrads to come work for them, not just the consulting companies either. Like it's a lot of really high end companies that are on campus all the time, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to get kids to come work for them. But it's still not at the level that the CIM was. CIM for folks that weren't there, like it's almost hard to imagine that twice a week they were feeding you to come off campus. Please come off campus. Was that building technically on campus? They're like, come to this come to this building, and they're giving you free food and a presentation that says, please come work for me. Here's a sign up sheet. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
junior or a senior, please intern here. If you're graduating, please let us know so that we can hire you, please.
Yep.
Begging people for that. That's not normal in any other field.
Mm-mm.
So that would be my counter response to that parent. Also, you mentioned what your job was as an intern. You're just a little bit everything.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in a concrete lab and a flash lab and a cement lab. So that was a pretty interesting way to learn. And I don't know if it was better or worse than being out in the field, but man, you can't make many mistakes
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the lab because unfortunately with concrete testing, like you screw something up, you might not know you screwed it up till 7 days later.
7 to
Um,
28 days later.
yeah, or and a lot of the stuff we were doing was comparison testing. So
Mm-hmm.
if you like we're getting crazy air results, like this the mix is called for 5% air, but you're like 13 and you don't really know why. You got to figure it out. Well, they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can just go back out back and dig up more materials from the stockpile. There's no stockpile. They sent you 2 buckets and
Right.
you got what you got. So there were different constraints, different lessons learned. That was fun. And then lastly, I hit on one other thing. You talking about guys going into these operations jobs and getting good experience becoming plant managers. The best example of that, I think, was our friend Dan Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Dan got out and they realized right away. I mean, he was young. God, he was probably 26 when they promoted him to plant manager
Mm-hmm.
and maybe younger. And he was exactly the kind of kid you're talking about. Agriculture background, not afraid of hard work, got the education, went out there, learned to deal with people, and made concrete. And he ran
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest, if not the biggest, concrete plant in Baltimore, and did it successfully. And now he owns his own small business
Mm-hmm.
where he's hauling cement. But
Yeah.
it's the same thing. He's not afraid to work the long hours, not afraid to get his hands dirty. And now he's an incredibly successful entrepreneur, and he's 35 years old. And that's the kind of guy I'm proud to say that we know and that we graduated with.
Well, another good example, and that's actually a perfect segue into our guest, this week, Tyler Thornton. That's exactly what Tyler Thornton did. I mean, he ran a plant, and I forget what all else Tyler did, and maybe we talk. Maybe I can't remember. Maybe we talk about it in the discussion. But he's now an operations supervisor down in Florida, and he took that path, plant level, and he's now heavily involved in the operations for several plants down in Florida. Um, so that he's just another good example of where that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter much, I guess, where you start. It's where you finish. And if you start at that plant level, and if you start doing a lot of grunt work and everything else, I mean, that's just laying a good foundation to help you later on. And if you've got this in your mind, if you're a graduate or a if you're a student at any of these CIM programs listening to this, if you got it in your mind that you're going to graduate and start immediately at that project manager or that mid-level position, more often than not, you're probably not going to start there. You're going to have to start down a little bit lower and earn your dues, do a lot, do a lot more grunt work, probably work some long hours, some night shift stuff. But let me tell you, that's just going to do absolute wonders for your career later. May not feel like it now, may not feel like that at 2 a.m. when the plant's broke down, you're getting screamed at. But 10 years later down the road, you're going to think back at some of the stuff you learned on those nights, and it's just going to help you excel in life in general.
Yeah. Well, when we are on those job sites when you're young, what you start to realize is people don't understand the why
Mm-hmm.
behind what's going on. Why are we making this concrete that way? Why is this concrete reacting this way? Why are the solutions X, Y, Z that are fixing problems A, B, C? How do you connect those dots? And you realize that most of the people on the site don't necessarily know that. They're just doing what they're
Right.
told. And
Yep.
you'll realize as you're being told, oh, yeah, that's right. I remember learning about this. Oh, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
This is why. And you may even contribute solutions to the problems. And as a young guy, there's nothing better. Solving people's problems is what gets you promoted. And
Yep.
that's why we see guys like Dan Stone got promoted. We see guys like Tyler Thornton, who's our interview subject today, get promoted. Another interview that you probably just heard drop between the time we're recording this and it gets published, Dustin Highland.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for him, graduating
Yep.
with us. And now he's managing all kinds of stuff. I mean, solving problems is what will get you paid. And if you can focus on that, you'll be fine. Dan and Tyler, we talk about Dan Stone being a great example, Tyler Thornton being a great example. These are on the operations side. And they both, they don't take anybody's crap.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that Tyler does and is he expresses so much gratitude toward
Mm-hmm.
people, and I just found that incredibly rare. We're going to talk about that a ton in this interview. In this interview, you're going to hear how much I absolutely adore Tyler. Just one of my favorite humans that's ever walked this planet, and I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate him coming on our show today.
Yeah, it was a great discussion, and like you said, Tyler's gratitude, and the amount of gratitude and appreciation he has for folks that that he works with is on a level that you do not see in this industry. I mean, not that many. There's not many times where you get a phone call where somebody says, "Hey, you're doing an excellent job. I appreciate what you're doing." Uh, it's not really a slight on the industry or anything like that. It's just the way things are in the construction industry. You got to have thick skin to work around this place. The fact that Tyler, goes out of his way to let people know how good of a job they're doing is just, he's a diamond in the rough when it comes to that.
Yeah, I actually tried doing a little bit of that in our industry, like even just like at Active Minerals, and I
Mm-hmm.
would call it, man, I just want to say, hey, just checking on you. Thought just thinking about some of these projects we did. Hope you're doing good. And they were confused. They were like, just like, why are you calling me? And like, yeah, cool, whatever. Like, I gotta go. I'm working. Like, what are you? And I was like, but Tyler seems to do it with grace and humility and the most sincerity. And so, yeah, I'm gonna say all those things in the interview, but I mean it. He means it. It's really I just can't say enough good things about this guy.
Yep. So let's get to it. Let's get to our discussion with Tyler Thornton.
All right, welcome in to Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast, one of our favorite humans of all time, Mr. Tyler Thornton. Thank you for being on here, man.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very glad to be here.
When I say favorite humans of all time, that is not a misstatement. In fact, it might even be an understatement. So, Tyler went to school with Joey and I, graduated from Middle Tennessee State, but we didn't just go to school together, we lived together. Tyler, what was your experience like living with Joey and I back in the day?
Grew quite a bit as a person. I always remember some of my favorite memories with Joey would be that he is the Rev, that as we would have said then, and then with Paul, one of my favorite things I always tell everyone I learned about being around Paul is becoming more polished in my delivery with people. I don't know because I always found that Paul had this uncanny and incredible ability to have a certain type of gravitas whenever he would speak with people, and his delivery and his professionalism, even when we were 20, 19, 20, or 21. That's one of the things I always remember there.
Oh, that's it. I never knew that. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say, brother.
Yes.
So I'll tell you what I always remember of you. is you were just like the nicest guy. You were very unassuming, very friendly, very quiet. And then all of a sudden, the clock strikes midnight, the guitar comes out, and the voice of an angel comes. It emanates from you, and your ability to play guitar and sing and connect with people. It was like a superpower that you didn't even know you had. All you knew is that from a very early age, you liked playing guitar, you're obsessed with it, and singing and making music was just something that just poured out of you. But what it ended up being was a way to connect. And I'll never forget, like one time we were in I don't know if it was an actual party. It was like a big gathering, and you came out into the chapter room and you were playing in the corner by yourself, and everyone that I was trying to have a conversation with that didn't realize that you were this ultra talented singer and guitar player just stopped what they were doing and tried to find where that beautiful music was coming from, and they would just gravitate, and people would just be standing around watching you. All the conversation stopped, everybody was just watching you. It wasn't a gimmick. It was like people could feel it coming out of you, and you didn't even realize that you were in your own universe. And I remember talking to you, being like, wow, like I don't even know if you realize what you have here, man. It was really, really special. And just to watch you sort of become that sort of shy, introverted person. And I think partly through music, partly through friends, you really grew to become an excellent communicator.
Thank you very much. I still play, by the way. I mean, it's almost 33 years I've been doing that, and I feel like I'm finally crossing a barrier now, as for at least for how I feel I'd like to be able to play. But thank you very, very much. I
What does that
mean,
mean? What you feel like you like? Because so back in the day, 20 years ago, when we were living together, you wanted to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. What does that mean now when you say you've crossed that bridge?
uh, it changes as long as I've been playing. I'm in At first, when I was young, all I wanted to do was be Eric Clapton and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix, and then I realized that's a tough thing to do. So then it got to where I would go through different iterations of what it really was I wanted to I wanted to learn or do, and I'm getting to where now I would just like to be a well-rounded, consummate musician, and depending on wherever the audience is, whether especially sometimes when I play live now, to be able to be musical enough to be able to judge the audience, go, oh, well, this might be a 80s, 90s country crowd here. Oh, well, this here might be something I could get a little bit of late 90s, early 2000s feel. Or this is a place I could do a lot of more R&B and be able to seamlessly go in between all those different genres and be able to play jazz music, classical, and just be a total well-rounded musician, and then just always try to close that gap on perfection, so to speak.
Yeah, I always loved hearing about your backstory because you have had such a winding road from the boy from Hornbeak, Tennessee. I'll never forget where you're from, Hornbeak, Tennessee, all throughout your childhood, and then when we met you in the AGR house, your first year. Even then, you had an incredible backstory, and a journey from that brought you to that point, and then from that point to now is still pretty incredible to me because I believe you were initially at MTSU as a music major or a recording RIM major, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
because that and jazz performance.
right, right. And so, and I think a lot of people know because I've told the story before. I was a recording industry major when I first went to MTSU, and then I ended up in concrete. But I always love hearing your backstory, and I think that's what we kind of want to dive into today. Like, what brought you? We can go through your childhood and everything going on before college if you want to, but I really want to know like what made you get into concrete and what brought you down to Florida. Where you're at now.
Well, as far as if we start with just with concrete, I mean, I guess so to speak, it would be a family business. I mean, my grandfather, Guy Thornton, he retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, and he built concrete roads and bridges all over um, Asia, Western Europe, the Middle East, and all over North America. And I mean, my family was even in Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos during the Vietnam War. They had to leave Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge took power, and it was just always something that once I really kind of met both of you, and then I knew something about the CIM program, and then after I had already went to school the first time, I know that I I wanted something that would be more kind of a vocation than really just a job. And having gone to school for in a Bachelor of Arts, I mean that's a wonderful endeavor if you want to actually pursue that. But as far as its utility in the economic marketplace, it's not really up there. As far as any career paths that are really specific. And then I remember being around Nashville, and I just got to the point I wanted to be able to have skills and wanted to be able to have a career and have some sort of meaning to my life. And then I went back to school, and I know how happy it made my grandma, because she'd always say, "Your granddad would be so proud," because he worked for concrete all the time. No, for years and decades and decades. But she told me the only thing that you want to make sure, she said, for 30 years, you just don't want to be the college boy that shows up on the job site who knows everything. So she just told me that my very first day as an intern, she called me at like 5 something in the morning. She said, I, she's like, "I'm sure it isn't any different than it was in the 70s. Just don't show up and be the college boy who knows everything."
Yeah, be humble. That's a good
Yes.
lesson from grandma. But you had a good family. And, I do want to go back, if you don't mind, because this story always touched me. And I think about it quite often. Is your family, you were mostly raised by your mother and grandparents, because when you were very young, your dad tragically passed away. And
Yes.
the way he passed away it was just horrible. And the reason I think about it all the time is we go into these safety trainings and these OSHA trainings, and I'm guilty of it too, just kind of rolling my eyes sometimes at, like, golly, another safety training. And I tell you, I snap back. I think about you all the time. Every one of those trainings, I snap back, because your father was killed on a job site by a freak accident. And man, like that stuff, it keeps your head on straight when you're walking around a job site.
Yes.
So that type of situation, when you hear a guy like yourself playing guitar, like, that those experiences that led you to a position where you were able to pour your heart into something, and now you've got a degree and you got knowledge, and I see you pouring your heart out into people in an industry where that might not necessarily be common, and that's what I want to get into. So you start off with, you're working for Titan, correct? But you're on the ready mix side, is that right?
That is correct. On the East Coast, and I have one plant in Orlando. So
East.
by East Coast, we're talking about Cocoa, Melbourne, Vero, Fort Pierce, and Stewart, and St. Cloud is in there, the plants that I'm over.
Okay, so you're in Florida working for Titan on the ready mix side, but what's your actual role? And I'm going to get into what I think is the most fascinating thing you do.
I technically, on paper, I am an operations supervisor. So I have 6 direct reports who are the plant managers and at all 6 of those facilities, and I report to the regional operations manager. So the day-to-day operations, and just to be honest, is for me, I don't operate anything, I don't sell anything. I mean, my job is really just to try to make sure other people have what they need to be successful. And then that's pretty much my job. And I mean, there's a whole lot of minutia that goes into it. But if people need things there, need some sort of support or anything that is similar to that, that's what I do.
And so, part of one of the things that I have no doubt that you created this, and it's part of the culture that you're looking to inspire in these plants, is you go around and you publicly recognize folks who are doing a good job, and it's not just like, oh, it's your birthday. It's like they're doing a good job, and when it is their birthday, you show up with cakes and candles, and you make it an event, and let people know that you actually care. And I saw you posting that on LinkedIn. And it's the first time I've ever seen anybody post anything like that. and I felt it was genuine. I could feel through that camera, like, this is Tyler Thornton. This is who he is. This is what he does. You're one of the most caring guys I've ever seen. What made you think that in a business where nobody like goes out of their way to like call you and tell you how you did a good job pouring that concrete yesterday, what made you think I'm going to bring that flavor, I'm going to bring that character, I'm going to implement this into the concrete world? How'd you get there?
I mean, to give specific details might be tough. I just know from what I know in my own personal life is that all the time, all the times that somebody's ever, no matter how small it was, no matter how mundane it happened to be, when somebody noticed or recognized anything I did, it I would always remember it, and it always kind of touched me. And then the longer I was ever over people, or like people reported to me, I noticed that how much difference you can make in people's lives by doing the really focusing on the small things. That when you see somebody and you notice that they did a good job, or if you notice anything that's going on with them, even if it's just, hey, man, your truck looks really clean, or hey, man, I saw you out there, what you wrote on the ticket for those details that were going to be on that job site. That's fantastic work. Or as you pointed out, one thing that, two things really that people, the the first thing is that there's no sound I'm aware that anybody loves more than the sound of their own name. Like remembering someone's name and remembering just basic details about them. Because just being able to remember someone's birthday so they don't feel like they're just a number, and being able to show up on a Saturday, which in our business sometimes can be really controversial, and just show up there, and it doesn't have to be Ruth's Chris or filet mignon, but hey, I went and I got some Chick-fil-A, or one of my personal favorites, let's go to Publix, let's go get some chicken, let's go get, I'm only going to get the Southern style potato salad though. I mean, go get some potato salad and just different stuff like that. And it just really, really seems to resonate with people. And it, I mean, I could go on and on about it. I just know that I just, I guess to use a historical example, I mean, Julius Caesar would have never been Julius Caesar if the people who crossed the Rubicon for him didn't connect with him on a certain level and didn't feel like he cared. And then I just always kind of took that approach that most of the people, another favorite story of mine, I know Georgy Zhukov, who was the field marshal for the Soviet Union. I mean, not a fan, but I know that during the Battle of Moscow, I always remember when I was a kid that there was this very, very great story where whenever the frontline troops were walking across, and then they were gathering up all the supplies and ammunition, and then he was riding in his Jeep, and then he saw all the officers not helping, every officer he personally encountered not helping out the frontline troops. He sent every single one of them to the most dangerous parts of the Eastern Front. And then
Holy
that was
cow.
just something that was there because he wanted people to understand that those are the people where you make your bread and butter. And then we learned in 2020, where I'll try to finish there, is that, there's a lot of talented people and managers and leaders, but when it comes to our truck drivers, I mean, if you don't have truck drivers, I mean, you're not going to have toilet paper. You're not going to have meat. You're not going to have all sorts of things. You don't have mechanics. I mean, no one understands how much you're going to need a plumber until your toilet doesn't work. So,
I want to go back in just a second, but I want to expand first on what you said about the truck drivers. Joey and I just got back from ConcreteWorks, the trade show where they have the rodeo, the truck driving rodeo. And I feel like a lot of times in our business, the truck drivers can get, sort of a bad rap. And then here they were being celebrated. And man, I tell you, the energy, I'm not a big vibes guy, but the vibes in that place, like I've never experienced anything like it.
Yeah, they were definitely the focus of that entire show. We were there from Friday and we left Monday morning. And from the time we got there, from the time we left, it was 99.9% about them truck drivers, and rightfully so. They catch a lot of flack every day, pretty much all day long, from somebody at the plant, somebody on job site, and sometimes on this podcast we give them a little bit of grief too. But it was great to see something, just recognizing their talents. Because if you've never operated a mixer truck, I mean, it's tricky. Yeah, they catch a lot of grief, but I mean, you got to know what you're doing. There's a tremendous safety responsibility on those guys when they get out on the road with 10 yards of concrete in the back of the drum. Uh, it's not for everybody, and I was really happy to see those guys get some recognition, and I hope we go back, and I hope we go to the banquet next year.
Tyler, have you ever been to the show or to any of the rodeo banquets, whether it's a local one or one that Titan maybe put on to see like who goes?
Yes, we just had in September, we had our own rodeo for the state between the Jacksonville, Volusia, the Central, of which the East Coast and Orlando are part, West, and Tri County, which is another way of saying Miami areas. And we had them because we have a state rodeo that's done between all the different suppliers that is hosted by the Florida Concrete Products Association. And it's a great thing because especially when you see drivers and they come in there and they get to bring their family, and then when they're in their mixer, and then their families, their wives, and everybody's cheering them on, or someone's getting in the loader, and then they get the ball to try to put it in the bucket, and then I mean everyone there goes absolutely crazy if they get the bucket in the drum or the ball in the drum. It's a great time.
Yeah, so I mean, so imagine that just like on the national scale. So you sent the best guys from Florida, best guys from Alabama, Georgia, Texas. Everybody sends their best up to this. It's pretty incredible atmosphere. I want to go back to what you were just saying a minute ago. I think I may have just learned something about you, and I've known you for about 20 years. So this is good. Are you a real student of history?
Yes. I love history because I remember growing up. I guess you'd say I grew up in a town of like 300 people, so I would just read books about, and especially my grandfather, who did work with concrete, he was the one that we should all be old enough to remember the Dewey Decimal System. And one thing he always loved to do is go to the library, and he would read books of American history, military history, and he would take me up there, and we would just sit in the library and we would read. And it just developed this really deep love of history that I have. And I really love ancient history. I'm a big fan. I mean, I did have a dog for 10 years named Aristotle. And as far knowing history, it's kind of the guidepost that can lead you into certain directions, whether good or bad, because the old expression, there's nothing new under the sun. And then for pretty much any type of clever thought you have or any type of experience, especially any of us as leaders, I mean, the technology may be more advanced, but there's nothing that I encounter on any given day that somebody that ran a certain segment of a Roman legion in the second century didn't have to deal with when they were dealing with people. Or if you found that Charlemagne, after he started bringing about the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, he would have had to find the same thing when we talk about executives. I mean, when he's sitting there over all these different kingdoms, he would have had to deal with the same type of issues. And I just kind of use them as case studies and sometimes as a guiding light to try to help me figure things out.
That's interesting. So I'm not a student of history, not in the sense of it's not interesting. Just like you said, you got turned on to it when you were younger. So I do like history. And one of the things I listen to is the Hardcore History podcast by Dan Carlin.
Oh, yes.
My only problem with Dan Carlin's podcast is it comes out once or twice a year. so once you've gone back and listened to the library, which you have to pay for, but he doesn't charge you. It's like $1 an episode. And Wrath of the Khans, it was like the greatest series of audio I think I've ever heard in my life. So I'm always looking for new stuff. You have any recommendations for a guy that does like history, but maybe I'm not a student of it like yourself?
Well, I'll tell you somebody that ironically enough sometimes gives both thoughtful and really hilarious things on it. There is a comedian by the name of Shane Gillis. Sometimes he has his own podcast to where he talks about, he's a very well read fellow, and sometimes he will go on kind of not, they're not tangents. He would just have like in the middle of talking with Matt, his kind of podcast host, and they will talk about those. There is, I mean, some of the people that I typically like to read in a modern context, I mean, I'm a big fan of Victor Davis Hanson. I always liked his book, Savior Generals, because he kind of compares that some people from ancient history to modern history about how they were in certain contexts, and he even compares them to Westerns. Kind of like they're the John Wayne figure, or they are the kind of Shane figure in the Westerns, to where no one really respects their skills until you need them. So, I mean, that would be another good one as far as history. And I mean, other than that, I would always just go with the bread and butter. I mean, obviously, Aristotle, Thucydides. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, dropping all these names working for a Greek company. That's kind of ironic too. But I mean, I just always kind of really liked to try to find when there's something, even when it comes back to music, if there's something I like, I want to try to dig down to the root of where the people that came up with that, well, where'd they get it from? And then the people that they got it, well, where'd they get it from? And then that's kind of how I approach it.
So my only issue that I sometimes have when I like some of these ancient sources, like Dan Carlin will start talking about them, but some of these people, it was hard to know if what they were saying was just like propaganda and
Yes.
not true. So I always wondered. So that's why I always ask people like yourself, who maybe is self-proclaimed student of history, who you're reading, so that you feel not like your information you're getting is perfect, but it's digestible and maybe as close to historically accurate as possible.
I mean, with me, I would find that a lot of times dealing with primary sources is always good, but then the secondary literature can, I mean, oftentimes there's a richness to it, because even Thucydides in his history of the Peloponnesian War, he's quite forthcoming that a lot of these aren't all just totally accurate, but they're just kind of word of mouth type things that go on through there. I mean, even when he talks about like the Melian dialogue, which is a kind of a famous scene throughout there. I mean, a lot of times, especially with some of those those ancient texts, I think a lot of them were more in the same way with the story that it's conveying is a parable is often really what they're trying to get at. Or I mean, because when I do a training session, and then my favorite whenever we have new hire orientation, our senior HR manager Maria or Sherry, they give our new hire orientation, and then I have an entire PowerPoint about an introduction to operations, and I always love to give the mythological founding of the city of Athens as what I'm there to do. And I always say that in ancient Greece, when Athens was at war with King Minos, every year 7 boys and 7 girls had to be taken to the island in order to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. And then Theseus was one such boy who was slated for one of these very, very, this dark fate that was before him. And in order to liberate himself and the city of Athens, he would have to go through the labyrinth, which was fashioned by Daedalus. And no one had ever made their way through it. And lucky enough for Theseus, Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, fell in love with Theseus and gave him a golden cord and a golden ball of string, which he used to go into the labyrinth and find his way back out. And I always love to use that, just because I say that's what I'm here to do today. Is I am here to give you your own golden cord and your own golden ball of string in order to get your own way out of this labyrinth you find yourself in, which is ready mixed concrete.
Just don't become Daedalus and
yes,
fashion wings for your new hire Icarus, and
Don't fly too high to the sun.
Don't fly too high to the sun. See, I know some of these references. So, but with your ancient Greece too, Marcus Aurelius. I feel
Yes.
like reading his private writings, I know a little bit about those. I think people will be surprised to find that folks like him, who was a military genius, really, and probably one of the greatest statesmen of all time, and he was incredibly what we would call progressive today. He was had more empathy than you could possibly imagine as a man who had to deal with more than we could possibly imagine. So his writing, I don't know if you've ever had time to read some of his writings, but incredibly thoughtful guy.
The Meditations by Marcus
Yep.
Aurelius
Yep.
are possibly one of the pinnacles of all human literature that's ever been written. And the most fascinating thing is when as you already alluded to, these are really just private writings.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just writing to himself. And then the only thing I heard a lecture once from the teaching company that summed it up about Marcus Aurelius the best, that in his day, to be the Roman emperor meant you were the most powerful person on earth. And he said, imagine that anything you ever wanted, anything you could desire, you could have. Anybody, I mean, anything, anyone. And imagine further that you had all this. And then imagine even further that with all this power, you never brought any shame on yourself. And he said that would be what it would be like to be Marcus Aurelius. That when you go 2,000 years later, that someone like him, no matter he had all this power, and then the only thing that was most important to him was to live a life of virtue, and that was always a person that could always take into account the thoughts and the feelings of others, and to always try to take into account how the feelings of the conquered, or I mean, just in a person of just immense, immense level of virtue that I mean, I couldn't agree more about just loving to read Marcus Aurelius. Great
But,
movie too.
but see, some of those things you just mentioned are some of the things that I know you've thought about before, because I can see it when you're going around and you're thinking, how do my people feel, and what can I do to make sure they understand that the way I feel about them is coming across. And it's a beautiful thing, brother. We don't work in a business where people communicate regularly. I appreciate you. You're doing a great job, and you're doing that privately, publicly. I really just think it's good to see. It's not an HR contest. It's not a photo for the newsletter. You're doing it because it's who you are and you really mean it. And I couldn't be more happy to have you in this industry.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, it's a shame that they got a Bama football loving boy down in Florida, and you got to deal with all those insane people. You got Gator fans, Seminole fans, Hurricane fans. How do you put up with that?
I'll put it to the fans that here in Florida that are the most over the top about at least the level of bravado they have when they talk in Florida are the Hurricane fans. Believe it or not, they have the most bravado. I mean, like right now here in Florida, I mean, let's be honest, the Seminole fans, they've seen better days. I mean, like you go out somewhere on a Saturday, you might want to send a search party for them, some of them, because especially I didn't even really think about it because one day I grew up in West Tennessee and I just show up because my buddy, a good friend of mine, he's an entrepreneur here in the town I live, to Barry, and he owns an Irish place. And then we went in there, and all I noticed was that Memphis was winning, and I didn't even notice that they were beating Florida State. And all I said was just go Memphis, and then half the place just turned to look at me as though I was trash talking them specifically. And I was like, "Look, I'm from West Tennessee. I don't know."
Yeah, huge mistake. Well, even when we were in college together at Middle Tennessee State, and you proclaimed everyone that, oh yeah, I'm a Bama fan. Paul's not alone, and they looked at you like it said something bad about their mama. It was unbelievable.
Well, I still to this day, I can tell you that I'm still, no matter what anyone says about it, I love Nick Saban. I rip that dude off with things I say at work all the time. Whenever I tell someone just I don't know, even sometimes on our daily calls, the one thing I try to always tell them is let's not focus on the outcome, just focus on the process. And we're going to focus on doing things with the right level of focus, the right level of intensity, and the right discipline to execute, and everything else will take care of itself.
I used Nick Saban this morning with my wife. we're talking about parenting, and my daughter wanted to wear something to school this morning, and it looked ridiculous. And you know, my natural inclination is like, she's a very artistic person, and actually, she wants to learn to play electric guitar. That's the thing she wants to do right now. I'm nervous about it though, because she is talented, but it's the hurting your fingers thing. I don't want to. Anyway, that's another story for another day. So she was going to look ridiculous, and my first inclination is just let her do it. Like, she'll figure out at school, either somebody's going to tell her she looks ridiculous and she'll take it off, or it's going to be uncomfortable. But my wife immediately is like, she's Eastern European, and she's like, you look ridiculous. Take that off. And, my daughter is like, oh my God, like, feelings are hurt, just tears. And I was trying to tell her, like, it's not you that she's saying is ridiculous. She's saying these clothes are ridiculous. And it wasn't until afterward when I was having a post-mortem with my wife about, these tears that happened. She didn't understand, like, why is she upset? I'm helping her. And I was like, yeah, like, we got to get her to think like Terrion Arnold thought about Nick Saban last year, 2023. He's a 5-star recruit, defensive back. He got taken in the first round of the draft earlier this year, and he's starting as a rookie in the NFL. And he was doing something, and didn't even look like he did anything that was incredibly wrong. It wasn't like he scored a touchdown on him or anything. And as he's coming off the field, Nick Saban is chewing him out. I mean, ripping him a new one. And, I think the sports media wanted to make it a thing that this guy was just chewing him out as he was walking off the field. He was saying, yes, coach, yes, coach. So after the game, they asked him, like, hey, what happened there? Like, how do you feel about that? And he said, I have such faith in Nick Saban. I have so much confidence that he's always looking out for the best for me as a person, that you have to just listen to what he says and not how he's saying it. And he taught me something in that moment, in his passion speech, and I listened to that, and it made me a better person. So yeah, man, we're invoking Nick Saban at my house all the time.
Well, college football is a circus right now, and if college football is a circus, then the Vols are Barnum and Bailey, because we just beat the crap out of a bunch of elephants the other day. Go Vols!
Wow. I was so uncalled for it. I'm sitting here, I'm pouring out my heart as a parent. Like, how do I get my daughter to think like a 5-star cornerback? How do I impart this mindset? And you come in here with this circus crap. You're lucky I still do this podcast with you. That's how I feel.
I mean, you can say what you want to, but we beat that high end last weekend, so you can't say nothing to me. Not for another year anyway.
Look, the parents aren't supposed to argue in front of Tyler. All right? You understand? Tyler, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry. He's rude. I can't help it. I can't control him.
You should appreciate it, though. I don't ever talk crap about college football, because 99 out of 100 times in the past 20 years have no leg to stand on when it comes to talking smack in college football. But just every now and then we get a little bright spot. And when we played Alabama this year was just one such bright spot. I say we beat Alabama like we just ended up with a few more points than y'all did, because we both played terrible.
Now, speaking of football, it's not college, but the very first thing one of the few first things we spoke about that I've always interested in. What are the Eagles fans like if you're in Philadelphia?
Oh man, yeah, up here in Philadelphia, it is. Everything is about the Eagles, and when it's also the Phillies too.
Oh yeah.
So here, which I hate the Phillies. I was such a big Braves fan my whole life, and have such disdain for that. That was just the worst looking P you could ever write. They're wearing pink. It's just, the whole thing is just weird. But you come here and the town revolves around it. And when the Phillies are good and especially when they're in the postseason, there is an energy to Philadelphia. When the Eagles are good or really bad, either one, there's an energy to Philadelphia. But all anybody wants to talk about is Eagles football. That's it. Eagles football is everything around here.
Was it their stadium that had the booking room underneath it, like history had like decades and decades ago?
I don't know. Their stadium was the one that threw batteries at Santa Claus.
Oh wow!
Yeah, yeah. And the fans were just mad about something, and Santa Claus came out onto the field, and they all started throwing batteries at him. That's the type of people we're talking about here. They're tough, they're loyal, and man, when the Eagles are good, there's not a happier set of folks everywhere. You know what's interesting though? Before I came to Active Minerals, I worked for Lafarge, but I worked out in Kansas City. It was the same thing, even to an even bigger scale, and they didn't even have Taylor Swift back then. The town came alive around the Chiefs. It was hard to even describe. It was really, and they were terrible. They were awful, and the town just it bled red, like Chiefs red. It was really something to see. So Philadelphia, I would say, is a lot more angry than the Kansas City fans, but I would actually put the Kansas City like the hype. It was like all they had, man. It was like they felt like that was all they had. They were so proud of their team.
Because I mean, I've heard some stories about Philadelphia and the fan. I mean, because didn't they riot after they won the Super Bowl? Probably.
Yeah. So what they have to do here is they have to actually put the police go out and they have to put grease on the street lights so that people don't climb like the light poles and try to climb and like dance up on the poles because they'll eventually break. So they have to grease up the poles so people won't climb it. So now it's just a competition to see who can climb a greased pole.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about the Flyers?
The Flyers, I mean, they're not as popular, but it's not to say they're not popular. But I think if you go back and you have like the Yammer Yager days, like back then, I think it maybe was a different attitude. They're still very, very popular, well attended. They sell out. It's not like that. But the team's not at the same level. The Sixers, man, people here, they love their 76ers. They're also, the team's pretty good. So they'll finish like number one in the regular season. They get bounced in the first round and everybody complains. But, you know, they freaking love their sports here, man. It's crazy. They love it.
I still remember Iverson back in the day when he played there. The answer.
Well, they do too. Yeah, I don't know, man. Hopefully, Kalen DeBoer gets that team back on track. I get nervous. You know, I don't hear anybody talk about this. This is supposed to be a concrete podcast. We're going to divert into college football again. I get nervous though because one of the things I don't hear anybody talking about is Jalen Milroe, who for whatever reason the last couple of games hasn't been able to hit the broadside of a barn with a pass. He's been throwing a bunch of interceptions, and nobody on the team like comes over and tells him like, "Hey, it's okay. Like, we'll get him next time." Like, he walks off the field alone. And then he goes sits on the bench alone. And then he stands on the sideline alone. There's nobody around him. Throws a touchdown, unless it's like the miraculous touchdown to beat Georgia. Every other touchdown throw, he pats his center on the head and he walks off the field by himself. And I get kind of nervous when I don't see obvious team chemistry emanating from the quarterback spot. It just makes me nervous.
Do you guys think that some of the stuff, because what you're saying, like the lack of team, chemistry, I guess, it's almost like since the SEC is so cannibalistic this year, like there's nobody that has really separated themselves away from everybody in the SEC. It used to be Bama and Georgia and whatever else, but there's not that this year. Do you think it's kind of a result of the NIL and the transfer portal, and we got so many guys coming in and out that they're not spending 2 and 3 years with their teammates? There's that dynamic just isn't there, maybe like it was in the past. Do you think that may be a reason for situations like Milroe, like you just talked about?
Yeah, it might be to the college basketballization of college football. With the NIL money, I've pondered that, not to any great deep depth or anything, but I've wondered that too because essentially, functionally speaking, the NIL, all I understand that to really be is just free agency for college football.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty
I don't know
much.
I didn't know if anybody else ever thought of it that way, but I just like now they're just free agents.
I don't know. What I can tell you is if anybody wants to give me an NIL deal for this podcast, I'm more than happy to consider it.
Especially the people at Diet Dr. Pepper Cherry, if anything, you know.
Well, okay, quickly, we're gonna wrap this thing up, brother. But I saw you drinking that Dr Pepper Zero. My brother, I didn't even know that existed till 10 days ago. My brother came over to my house, stayed the weekend. He swears by it. And then
I love those.
I try not to drink any soda if I can help it. So I haven't tried it. I still have some left over in the fridge. My daughter drank it, and she said it was the first time she tried a diet soda that tasted like a regular drink, which is kind of interesting.
I'm a big fan. I mean, the only I've always been drinking them because like diet because I know that my grandmother on my mom's side was a juvenile diabetic. My grandfather on my mom's side was a diabetic, and then my grandfather on my dad's side was a diabetic. So I try to just do anything possible.
Well, Tyler, I'm glad that one of those possibilities was you coming on the show, hanging out with us. It's good to reconnect with you after so long. Didn't get to tell the whole story, but it was fate that really you came on this show. I hadn't been on social media for 18 months, and my wife asked me to check to see if I had a message for something for a thing we were dealing with, and which ended up being unbelievably positive. And another positive thing that came out of that was when I opened it, you had sent me a message like just a few hours earlier. I had not been on there in 18 months. And just a couple hours before I open up that app, I had a message from Tyler Thornton saying, "Hey, I'd like to reconnect. I'd love to talk on the podcast." Man, I knew right then you were destined to be on this show, destined to be back in our lives. It's great to hear from you, brother. I just can't say I just love you to death, man.
Love y'all too, man.
This is
Well,
great. Joe, anything to wrap up, brother?
Well, we can't let him get out of here. We can finish on a concrete or construction note. We got to ask him what's the wildest thing you've ever seen on a job site, Tyler?
The wildest thing I have ever seen on a job site. I
Or
mean,
plant or whatever.
well, I guess at a plant, I mean, there was the time when I was at a different organization. Daytona's kind of like Gotham. And then, so I'm serious. Daytona Beach is like Gotham, okay? Because when you're there, there's nothing but helicopters flying over. There, like most places, there is a bus that goes around the county, the city, whatever. It differs by municipality. But they were sitting there at the bus stop right there off Indian Lake Road, right off of International Speedway. Well, one of the people driving the county vehicle was driving too fast and didn't pay attention and T-boned right into the back of the bus, but locked the doors on him, caught on fire, burned him up right down at the end of the road by the concrete plant, and completely shut down a huge part of 92, or what's also called International Speedway and Indian Lake, and all the county and the Florida Highway Patrol. They would let our trucks leave the yard, but they wouldn't let them come back until they were done. So we had to just completely reorganize how we were going to finish off the entire day. So,
Golly, that may have topped the list right there. I have rolling around in my head the idea of Daytona Beach as Gotham, and I could only imagine what kind of Batman would come out of Daytona Beach, Florida.
3 years. I mean, I live in Volusia County where Daytona is, and I worked right there in Daytona for 3 years running that plant. And the things, I mean, especially if it's bike week, the Daytona 500 there, Biketoberfest, it's Gotham by the sea. I mean, I don't know if they want to put that on a postcard, but it's Gotham by the sea.
Hey, brother, I honestly thought your story was about Jacksonville. I don't know how so the fact that Daytona's up there on that level, that's something.
Golly.
Yeah, dude. Hey, this has been an absolute pleasure, Tyler. Let's keep the conversation going offline too. All right.
Yes, sir.